Okay, welcome back to the PVA office, everybody. Today we're joined by Darryl Neher, who's the CEO of Lexington Habitat for Humanity. And today we're going to talk about housing affordability. So, welcome and thanks for being here, Darryl.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it.
To kick things off here, right off the bat, let's give the folks a little bit of a background. So, I put out a lot of statistics throughout the course of the year to try to get some context to what's going on in this confusing and very frustrating housing market. And one of the stats that I've been putting out lately and annually is how many new houses we're building every year and what the kind of the median price is. And so, one of them that I did just recently was in all of 2024, the Lexington community built exactly two houses under the price of $250,000 that were intended for owner occupancy and available for sale on the market. And there are some other organizations such as Habitat and some developers who have built other houses under 250, but they were either intended to be investment rental property or for your clients at Habitat. And so I've kind of excluded you from that statistic, and you all called me out on it, and rightfully so.
And it wasn't really calling out. One of the things we wanted to do is to highlight that there are organizations out there.
Right.
Right. And we thought that number that you highlighted, two, I mean, again, two, it was so powerful that people need to know that just how bad the housing crisis is within Lexington and Fayette County.
Completely agree. That's how we got to.
Yeah, and so all of a sudden we're able to talk about if we're building 8 a year, and that's the number that we've been pretty consistently over the last 4 years. We are helping our partners, but where on the periphery, where out that are building up more of an inventory to help really address it, and the reality is we're not. And to be able to help facilitate that conversation, it was an important. I thought that your post was a very important post to be putting out into the
Well,
world.
thanks, and I'm glad that you chimed in. And the reason that I did not include you in the two and make it 10 houses is because new habitat construction does not make it onto the market. So that the typical buyer, willing seller, willing buyer, that your houses are not an option for them. You serve your private clients. So let's talk about that. In terms of affordability, Habitat has been a homeownership option for people for many years. So how does that work? How do you apply, and what are the requirements?
Yeah. So since 1986 to today, we have over 500 home buyer households that we have served, and that is a magnificent number for our affiliate. And who are we serving? It's individuals and families who earn 30 to 60% of our area median income, right? Right now, our area median income for Lexington and Fayette County has now pushed over $100,000. And so our service base is anywhere between about $35,000 into that upper area of about $65,000.
So what would a typical family afford? What would that work out to?
That'd be 65.
65,000.
65,000 for that 60% AMI at the top of our income ratio. For an area median income, it's about $102,000, right? And you start thinking about what properties are on the market, and you speak to this powerfully, that individuals who are earning that 80% of AMI to, or 60% of AMI to 100% of AMI, the number of properties available are slim.
Right.
And get any lower, and you see what an individual or a family could buy at 60% of AMI, you're talking about a handful of houses, and most of those homes are going to need significant repair and renovation to bring them up to a livable standard that you want for a family.
Right.
And that's what we're facing. And the question then goes, where do those individual families go to live if they can't find it in Fayette County, right? They go elsewhere. And we can see that in commute times, how those have increased over time. What people are comfortable with is now approaching an hour for commute to work. And where I moved from in Virginia, we had individuals who were living about 2 hours from the DC Metro, who would travel for work on a daily basis, and that took you out 4 or 5 counties.
So it used to be the saying was, you drive until you can afford it, and
Yeah.
so now you drive until you can tolerate it.
Exactly. Exactly. And so those are the families that we're working with. There are some other criteria that we look at. So that 30 to 60% of AMI is foundational, but we're also talking about need. And that need is focused around substandard housing, or people's living conditions such that it's causing health outcome issues, right? Are there landlords not doing the proper maintenance necessary to make it truly habitable? You also have issues with overcrowding that falls into that need category as well. And then third is that how many people are living and spending more than 30% of their income on housing?
And that number is important because that's kind of the standard that the federal government housing uses to describe affordable housing. So usually when I do these talks and presentations, I try to make the distinction between housing affordability, which is just a typical person, whether or not they can afford the house they want, and affordable housing, which has a federal definition of you need to be able to cover the cost of putting a roof over your head for no more than 30%.
Little a and capital A. Is how we refer to it. Yeah.
Right, but now they're blurred, right?
They are
Much more
immensely.
so than they used to be.
Well, to put it into perspective, 50% of AMI, we have 30% of the families living in Lexington Fayette County paying 30% of families paying more than 50% of their income on housing.
Wow.
And that breaks down, and this is from the recent Kentucky Housing Corporation study looking at what is our housing shortage, our gap study. 24% of renters are paying more than 50%, 6% of homeowners are paying more than 50% of their income. So think about the number of people and that means for our community. And just as I want to put this out there, while we're talking about that shortage side, for Lexington Fayette County, you're looking at about 22,000 units of housing short for our community. About 8,000 of those are home ownership.
Well, let's say those numbers one more time, because those let's put some context around it too. So there's about 100,000 single family residential units in Fayette County, and we're short.
22,000, and rental side is makes up the majority of that, but 8,000 is the number. Close to 8,000 is the number we put on the KHC has put on the home ownership side.
So getting back to the two houses that we build each year for under 250,000, we're only building 500 houses total in a year, and again, context is everything. We used to build 2,000 houses, so we never really recovered after the recession.
2008 killed the housing industry.
And it did, and a lot of places, not just here, but I think it's probably a little bit worse here. If you look at national statistics, I think like 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 houses sold is a newly constructed house, and that's just not the case here because we're not building houses here.
The number of that shortage, and we're not catching up. We're not even close to the 2008 number, and so that we're digging that hole deeper and deeper.
Right.
Which gets to the policy side of this conversation. What do communities need to do to be able to better address this? And in a community like ours, it really is a regional conversation. We can talk about those 22,000 units and where they might go and the challenges there. But when you think about the greater region, I mean, we are so interdependent upon county to county right now, right? In terms of where we have employment centers and where we have social service centers and the range of retail centers. And so that regional approach, I think, is a really important part of the conversation. We're seeing that materialize here in local governments who are cooperating now in some of those policy conversations. So.
Yeah, and I mean, there has to be some cooperation because so we have one of the big drivers here on our growth strategy is the urban service area, right? So we're not doing expansion right now. We're talking about expanding, but we haven't started doing that yet. But that would be the first time that we've done any kind of expansion since 94, 96, 30 years. Yeah. And so for the last 30 years, our growth strategy has been infill and redevelopment. And it's been the city's position that there's 5,000 acres available inside the urban service area for development. And some of that are just small vacant lots here, there, and everywhere. What are some of the challenges in trying to develop on using that strategy? And
so, I mean, what do you need to build a 1,500 square foot house, right? And we, had a conversation with the director of construction, Houston Royster, and we need about a 35-foot wide lot.
35-foot wide is that's kind of the minimum standard you're looking for.
That's what we're looking for, and then from there, the depth it can vary. But right now, if you look at the lots that we're putting together over on the Transylvania University site for Marquardt Field that we're working with the Bank Consortium and other affordable housing developers. You're looking at about a 3,500 square foot lot.
Okay, and so and 35 feet wide gets you those minimum setbacks and gets you a decent floor plan that you feel comfortable with and
Exactly.
get you the setbacks.
I mean, our average, our range for housing size is about 1,350 square feet up to about 2,000 square feet is the upper end. And we build to the needs of the families that we're serving.
And what have you seen in terms of price for a lot that size over the last few years?
So,
if you don't want to get into exactly
No,
what you're paying for a lot, but what have you seen as far as
I will be
trends?
glad to share that information. So before I arrived, I came to Lexington a little over 2 years ago. Prior to arrival, we were acquiring lots in the 25,000, maybe up to $30,000 range, and that was at the time considered still a lot of money, right?
Right.
We're now paying 55 to 60,000 a lot, and we are competing with market rate developers to purchase that land, right? And if we talk about affordable housing is so often throughout the nation. This is not something that is unique to Lexington, Fayette County, or Kentucky. No affordable housing gets built in this community or any community without a subsidy to make it happen.
Right.
That
It
is
just does not cash flow.
that is the
without it.
cold, harsh reality. And the question you struggle with is then what is the role of government? What is the role of the private sector? What is the role of philanthropic donations to be able to make that happen? And what we're seeing, and this is really the challenge. There aren't entry level homes for young professionals to purchase, let alone talking about 30 to 60% of AMI. And again, if people do not have that point of transition to get into the housing market earlier in your professional career, what's missing then is that ability to experience what we've always classified as part of the American dream. The idea that your ability to build equity and build wealth and generational wealth through home ownership is something that is going to be foregone by so many individuals and families because the inability to even find a place to buy. And so that means more rental spaces within the communities that we live across the country, including Lexington.
Let's dig a little deeper on that. So, for most of the history of Habitat, you all have focused on single-family detached houses, and I had the privilege of participating in a task group with Habitat a few years ago to explore what other options might be beyond the model of the single-family and detached. And I was a proponent of moving to townhouses and that so-called missing middle. And so now you all are building some really nice townhouses. So, talk a little bit about that transition.
When you look at the price of land and that we're acquiring, a lot of times that we're picking up scattered single lots. The idea of building a townhome, they're just not the land itself. It's not suitable because it may not be wide enough. You can't get the setbacks necessary, so you can't build the townhomes. But when we can combine lots, and that's what we've become really good at, buying multiple lots that we can piece together that are side by side to create a parcel big enough to be able to build townhomes. And that's what we did over on Perry Street. Those are the first townhomes that you're mentioning that were built. Now we're building over on 7th and Maple. We have a 7 townhome project that we're working on. And the reason being, cost and maximizing, like everybody who is a builder, maximizing what we can get out of that parcel. And so we're always looking at ways that we can deliver more affordable housing into the market. And to do that, you have the attached models, townhomes, that are attractive, and we'll be doing more of that.
There seems to be a little bit of a stigma on attached housing. You know, I often joke that the so-called NIMBYism that every single townhouse development that's been proposed in Lexington over the years has met with, quote, significant pushback from either the neighborhood association or the neighborhood. What is that stigma about, and do you think we're getting past it?
Are we getting past it? No.
No.
I mean, at the regional summit that the chamber held here just a little over 6 to 8 months ago, that question came up. Why somebody had just moved to Lexington from California and saying, why aren't there higher buildings, and why aren't there more condos, and why aren't there more townhomes? And I would make the argument that part of it is it doesn't fit the model of what the American dream is
Right.
about, right?
Single family detached house,
Single
fence,
family,
a yard.
exactly. And in, until we can normalize duplexes, townhomes, condominiums, we will face that challenge. So is the market there? I think it's growing. I would love to see some of the data nationwide how that's developing. But I think about a social media post that I saw. It was a picture of row homes in Great Britain, and saying if people looked at that, they'd dismiss it as saying what are these? But those are when you get inside, some of the most beautiful homes and properties that you could buy. And it's just I think it is a mindset. It is you're not people aren't accustomed to it as being sort of that entry level home. But certainly when you're talking about infill development, David, as being the priority, you're gonna see more and more and more. Yeah.
So are you getting that kind of a pushback on the townhouses from within your own clientele?
Uh, some,
They would rather have a house,
of course,
but they're
of
open
course,
to a townhouse.
of course, and that's the again, when you are in a situation where you are looking to get out of substandard housing for all of the reasons we talked about earlier, that townhome is a beautiful transition point for you,
Right.
And it's I think that we will see us doing more and more of those. It's almost a 50-50 split over on the Marquardt Field property that for the single family ownership properties, and so we'll have the townhomes included and incorporated in those as well.
Well, the one that I toured at the one on the very corner of Seventh and
Yeah.
Maple that's almost completed. That's a very nice and large home. The square footage of that home is actually larger than my house.
But
It's very nice.
well, and it's here's one of the challenges is also we talk about stigma. What does it mean to be a Habitat family, and what does it mean to be in a Habitat home? Um, we've been in situations where we've looked to acquire property where that stigma becomes a barrier to purchase. Um, but when we do purchase and we do build and we get our families placed, you break down the stigma. Talk to any of the folks from LFUCG who are coming out and checking out our homes and making sure that we're building quality. We build quality homes. We build
So how many townhouses, was there 6 or 7 on that?
Seven.
There's 7. So, and they were all in various stages of from complete at 7th and Maple to, it was just the slab when I was there on the one furthest south. And I did not see anything at any level of construction that made me feel like that it was substandard development.
I mean, and part of it, people are like, you got volunteers on the build site. Yeah, we have volunteers on the build site, but guess what? We also have our paid staff, trained staff who are construction experts who are there facilitating and helping people through that process. And when our homes get built, we just had one that we'll be closing here shortly. Our appraised value, because people talk about our property values will go down. Our appraised valuation on our most recent single-family home that we're going to close in with, detached, $280,000. So we are matching, if not exceeding, the valuation of some of the homes in many of the neighborhoods we serve.
So when you were talking about the price of the vacant lots, the 55,000, that at 7th and Maple, right? We're not talking about Garden Side at 55,000, which I think a lot of people would think, well, for 55,000, you could probably buy a fairly habitable house in the urban core. But that's what you're paying in the urban core for a very small vacant lot.
You know, you can find occasional lots in the urban core that are going to be 35,000, right? But those are very few and far between. And then when
And you're not going to do
up,
any assemblage with those, right? That's
Correct.
just, you're going to be stuck with this one lot.
Yep. That's what you'd be confronting. And one of the things to think about when you're talking about the townhomes, the type of infrastructure that has to go into that construction can drive up your cost. We had a parcel that we had purchased, invested in, had done due diligence, and believed what we thought would be an acceptable cost per lot, right? But once we got really deep in the planning process, there were some things that popped up. And all of a sudden, because of the infrastructure that would have to go in for water retention and drainage that weren't anticipated, it would drive up the price of the unconstructed lot on a 5-unit townhome to about $100,000, David.
Wow.
And so you wonder about what is going into all of these costs for townhomes and single family homes, regardless of whether it's an affordable home Habitat builds or a market rate. The type of infrastructure that goes in is also driving up the cost that we have to build.
What's your current split, attached versus detached?
Right now, I would say we're probably about 50-50. Going for and this is just currently with the build outs. I'm thinking about like 2 or 3 classes of, when I say classes, like we open up our application period, we bring in a class of partners who go into their home. So if you look over the last 2 or 3 classes, we're pretty close to a 50-50 split.
And looking out ahead, you've got a project coming up at Davis Park.
Yeah, we're working out the details of an MOU with them that would allow us to build some townhomes and detached, and that would be about 21 units, and it would be 2-to-1 almost. It would be 13 townhomes, 8 single-family detached.
So when you look out over the next few years, you think that 50-50 split is going to end up shifting more towards attached?
Well, I think especially when you're talking about infill development, you have to be prepared for that. And at some point in the conversation, and this is where it becomes even more challenging, if we're talking about lots and building, you also have to think about building up. And at what point do condominium style developments start being part of the conversation as well? Because you talk about missing middle, you're talking about townhomes, duplexes, quads, eightplexes, condos.
Right.
Those are what fit, and when missing middle, that's what we have seen over history. It's just not something that most of the country has been comfortable with building in neighborhoods, right?
So if somebody listening to this today thinks that Habitat might be an option for them, they want to explore it further, what do they do?
Yeah, I mean, visit lexhabitat.org. We do have information about our home ownership program. We also have a critical home repair program, and this is something I think is really important as part of the affordable housing equation. How do we keep people in their homes? And through critical home repair is an important component for people who aging in place or life circumstances have put them in a position where they haven't been able to do some routine maintenance and that have led to some bigger issues within the home. And we're doing anywhere between 8 to 15 critical home repair projects a year, averaging about $13,000, I think is the average cost of doing that type of work. So it's part of the equation. So visit our website, learn more about it, and we have the contact information there.
So there's probably a fairly quick screening process to find out whether or not you're within the income guidelines. But beyond that, how long typically does an application process take? And then how long from there does it take to start building your house?
It will vary from homeowner to homeowner. So some of the other criteria that we have, you're talking about the partnership is an important part, and because that partnership piece, you go through a screening to see are you meeting some of the requirements that would allow you to be able to buy, and that was also a criteria to all of our home buyers. This is one of the biggest myths we have. We do not give away homes. People are going into an affordable mortgage and are paying taxes and making that mortgage payment every single month. The other criteria is partnership. People are coming in after that screening process and making sure that you will be able to qualify for a Habitat mortgage or one of our third-party partners that we work with and Community Trust Bank. You have an educational component, right? Where we want to make sure that we're not just putting people into homes, that we're preparing households for home ownership. And that is everything from the financial component and for individuals to stabilize their finances. It's educating about repair and maintenance and being a good neighbor and talking about government and talking about the big bad PVA. Sorry. No, but talking about property taxes, right?
Yeah, people are dealing with it for the first time, probably.
Do you remember the first time you bought a home? And the first time that I bought a home, I remember thinking, how do people navigate this who have no preparation or lead in home ownership? This is your first opportunity, even with your family. Like, it can be overwhelming.
Yes.
And so then you add on, okay, when I pay off my mortgage, my property taxes are still my responsibility, but it's not being withheld through my escrow, and that educational component that we take for granted oftentimes. And so all of that is part of the educational program. Once people get through the educational program, they're also doing 250 hours per adult sweat equity, and that can be volunteering at a restore, on the build site for their home, on other people's build sites. And then also and through that process they'll go into their home, and usually that's 12 to 15 months.
Okay. And to get to your 250 hours, you're probably going to have to do something other than just working on your own home.
Yeah,
right?
you're working with your neighbors. And I got to tell you, it is so enjoyable on these townhome projects, because what's happened is there's a camaraderie among the home buyers
And then they
in
become
the classes,
neighbors.
and then they become neighbors. And so you're standing on the build site with soon-to-be neighbors, talking about, this is my front porch, this is your front porch. We're going to spend a lot of time out here talking back and forth, and you're building so much more than a physical structure. You are building a true community, along with hope and dignity, and pick so many other words that come with home ownership. It's a beautiful experience. So, I mean, you've been on the build site, and if you're building side by side by one of our home buyers, it is magical. And I challenge anybody to experience that, or go to one of our dedications and not walk away from that experience changed.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Darryl. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.